trusting that everybody can hear me now. And I'd first of all like to say a big thank you to Paul, not only to Paul, but all of Paul's colleagues for your welcome and help and support. We have been the founding sponsors and co-hosts of the Independent Firms Forum, now the Entrepreneurs Forum, since it began several years ago in Florida. We're sorry not to join you today in Washington, D.C., but we're looking forward to a great conference. And I'm particularly proud to be once again introducing the Entrepreneurs Forum, which traditionally has, I think, the most stimulating and open-minded talks of any of the components. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes because I want to share with you some of the learnings that we've seen on a macro level, on a big picture level. Of course, you know, we are working with a lot of agencies around the world. So we're getting many different inputs from a truly global perspective. So what I'm going to do then is talk for 15 minutes, and then we will introduce around a quarter before the hour 4 panelists, all of whom run successful independent PR firms, one in the Netherlands, one in China, one in the USA, and one in the UK. And we're going to be asking them to share with you not just the principles, but also the practice of what they have found works for them in all the challenges of the pandemic. So we'll be back to that in a short while, in about 15 minutes. So let me begin. I think next slide, please. I have to say each time. Right, so this is us, the Network One. We started the business 15 years ago. We now work with about 1,200 independent agencies, not only PR firms, but agencies of all disciplines. And we figured that an average number of staff in an independent communication agency is around 50, some much larger, some smaller. So that gives us about 60,000 friends around the world. And it's been wonderful to have their support and hopefully to provide some support as the year has gone by. Next slide. But of course, as we see in the graphic, we've all suffered very much kind of the same challenges throughout this year. And it's been a tough year for all of us. Next slide. Now, a pandemic, just to be clear on this, a pandemic does not cause social change. But what we've seen is that it accelerates long-term social change. So the things that were happening anyway are happening much faster today. We've also seen that it accentuates cultural differences and that it presents new opportunities particularly for all of us in the communications business. Next slide. We have seen some trends that I won't dwell on today because they're things that we all know. We see that e-commerce is booming. We see a huge rise in remote working and the ability to work remotely effectively, potentially supplanting the assumption that we work in our offices from 9 till 5. Clearly, we've seen reduced travel and many other businesses and sectors which have grown in importance and value, homewares being a particular one. If you talk to anybody from Procter & Gamble or Unilever, they're having record years because they sell fundamentally products that are used at home, and people are spending a lot more time at home. So we all know this. Next slide, please. But these, I think, are some of the more positive emerging trends that we've seen. What we've seen, I think, is that the pandemic, although it is a shared experience, it has really led to a growth in people being willing to take personal responsibility. We've been talking about the need for people to take more personal responsibility for their health for many years. Now we see people have to. We see people becoming much more conscious of their health because of the challenge, but not only in relation to the challenge. I'd like to think there's been a positive impact on climate change. It has been somewhat off the agenda for 6 months. While we've had wildfires and floods and storms and many other manifestations, But I do believe that there is a much greater willingness now that we've seen to take responsibility for our contribution to society, and climate change and awareness of that and reversal of it have been a part of that. We see growth in education. I can't tell you how many inquiries we've had from educational establishments trying to leverage the need to offer something new in education online with the ability to offer something that is distinctive and special and valuable and often international. And I believe we've also seen, as we sum up all of that, a growth in civic responsibility. So there are positives out of the pandemic. Next slide. We've also, of course, seen several less positive aspects in the pandemic. We've seen a great growth in the disparity of wealth. There's much communications and publicity about the growth in levels of severe, serious poverty around the world. And we've also seen this a great deal in the more developed markets where it may not be so obvious. Just to give a couple of examples, the figures in the US over the last 6 months, last 6 months that they exist, so that's about January to July, before the pandemic to in the middle, we've seen only 2% fewer jobs paying more than $60,000 a year. But we've seen 16% fewer jobs paying less than $27,000 a year. So what we have really seen is a disappearance of jobs, which are the prerogative of lower paid, less well-off people. And if anybody hasn't read it, I really recommend the book called The Coming of Neo-Feudalism by Joel Kotkin. And he writes about the disappearance or the shrinking of the middle class in favor of an upper class of extremely wealthy people and a lower class of very underprivileged people. I won't attempt to look at all of these in depth, but we've all seen the rise of nationalism and nativism and the closing of borders and something of a belief of keep other people out. I just want to sort myself out. We see it on a macro level. We see it on the small level. Like Wales has banned me as a resident of the United Kingdom, but living in London, from visiting their country until further notice. We see, as Paul talked about in his introduction, problems with minorities, whether they are minority groups in the US, talked about Black Lives Matter, but there's many other lives that matter as well. And we had talked them, we've seen it in Asia, in Myanmar, in China is getting a lot of publicity at the moment. And we see a lot of social problems coming out of this. We see the fragmentation of nation states like the United Kingdom, but also other federal states. And we see a reduced trust in institutions and media. And I'm sure this is going to be a major theme of our conference as we go forward. Next slide. We've seen global winners and losers. And next slide, please. I'm just going to move quickly through this. We all know that the global economy and the stock markets fell off a cliff sometime around the beginning of March. And this is the Dow Jones average. And we're looking at it from a year ago, that's October last year, right through to the current position in October 2020. This is charts from yesterday. And we see the recovery of the market. It's not a big recovery, but it is a recovery. The Dow is up about 6% from 1 year ago. That's today's figure. Let's just run through the next slides quickly, please. Next slide. So this is Alphabet, Google's parent. It was up 26%. We see Facebook is up 58%, not since the peak, not since the trough, but over the last year, year to date, up 58%. Next slide. Amazon up 85%. If you put a dollar in Amazon, it's worth $1.85 today, 1 year later. And we also see people in our industry who have not perhaps quite kept pace with the changes and are still struggling valiantly, not to survive, if you like, but to thrive. like WPP, I'm going to look at representing those. Next slide, please. And WPP is now down 26%. So it has recovered somewhat since the trough, but it's worth more than a quarter less since this time last year. Next slide. But I think the biggest thing, and this is what I really want to draw your attention to more than anything else in this introduction, is the growing divide between West and East. Next slide, please. And when I say West and East, of course, I'm partly thinking about the US and China, but I'm not thinking about this as a polarity on those two countries, but I'm looking at this as differences in the West as a whole. The US, Europe, even India has much more in common in the West than the Asia Pacific countries like China, like Korea, like Singapore. Next slide. We called the 1900s the American century. And we called the 2000s the Asian century. But both of those centuries got off to a pretty rough start. And next slide. Remember the iconic image of the US, the Wall Street crash, a man selling his luxury car for $100 because he needs money to eat. Next slide. And the people on the road in the dust bowls, looking for food, looking for homes, looking for work in a very tough situation. If we think now what the Asian century, how has this started? Let's look at this. Next slide. And what is the iconic image? It has to be something like this. This is the wet market at Wuhan, widely believed to be the original source of the pandemic, shuttered by China, of course, in January. And next slide. And this is the message written in the snow in memory of the Chinese whistleblower, Dr. Wen Liang. Goodbye, Dr. Wen Liang. And so China started off in a pretty tough way too. But it's not just about the bad start. It's about the resilience of China today and America in the last century. And let's go next slide, please. Because resilience is really the key defining characteristic of who's going to win in this pandemic. Next slide. Let's just play this video because this is America looking at China. And this is America saying to its own people what's been happening in the pandemic, which started in China. And is there really evidence that China is coming out? Let's look at this video. It's about 3 minutes from a news report from CNN. Please play the video.
The start of China's Golden Week holiday, celebrating the country's founding, leading to crowds like this, travelers wearing masks, but standing shoulder to shoulder at the train station. This marks the first major travel holiday in China since the coronavirus outbreak began more than 8 months ago, which makes this the first major test of COVID-19 containment here. Going back roughly to April, we've seen significant easing of restrictions across China. Sure, there have been cluster outbreaks, including one here in Beijing back in June, but many here are more worried about the spread in other parts of the world. And so most mainland Chinese travelers are staying within China's borders for their holiday, feeling a bit more protected perhaps, but it makes for a crowded bubble. From October 1st through the 8th, China Tourism Academy estimates there will be some 550 million domestic trips taken. That is nearly 70% of the trips taken at the same time last year. Hotel bookings, however, are up 50% from 2019, and so too is same city and short distance travel. Think staycation. Recent college graduate Steffi Liu normally prefers to go abroad, but this year she's among the millions planning a trip to another part of China.
My main concern is the type of transportation. I want to make sure to stay in a familiar environment, which is safer so as to make sure there's not too many unfamiliar people mixed together.
The last significant travel holiday here was the Chinese New Year, and while Beijing's Tourism Bureau canceled all large-scale celebrations for the holiday, we were at the Beijing train station as people crowded in to head to their hometowns. Very few wearing masks. No immediate worries, so it seemed. 3 days later, Wuhan, the original epicenter of the pandemic, went on lockdown, and the streets of major cities like Shanghai went bare for weeks. This was the iconic Bund in February, but gradually social life resumed. In April, more people venturing out. Just last weekend, the nighttime crowd packed in, most ditching the face masks. Major indoor events like this Beijing auto show also attracting crowds, a sign that many who for weeks were shuttered in their homes now feel increasingly comfortable that the virus will stay contained. It is worth noting not everyone in China is traveling freely for this holiday week. For example, there are restrictions in major cities like Shanghai for students. They're not allowed to leave the city unless they're willing to do 2 weeks quarantine before returning to the classroom. But the real focus is going to be on the days after for Golden Week to see if cases rise or if containment is as strong as China's central government portrays. David Culver, CNN, Beijing.
Just to reiterate the point, China has come through the pandemic. If we look at what's happened last week, which is Golden Week holiday, this is the scene, not a stock shot. This is the scene last week at Hongqiao Airport. Next slide. At Beijing Railway Station. Next slide. At the Great Wall of China being visited by tourists. Next slide. On the Bund, the big hotel and entertainment area in Shanghai. Next slide. And this is what brings it about. This is the CNN reporter's mobile phone, and this is his passport, not his real passport, of course, but his COVID passport, to show that he is subscribing to the track and trace system. He is known to be free of COVID-19, and he is therefore able to travel freely and move freely and go to restaurants and go to airports and go into his office. Without this, he can't do it. We look at it differently in the West. Next slide. This is one of the many books that's been written about the lack of personal freedoms and the impingement on personal freedoms through large organizations, including countries, having people's data. And really where we stand today is at a choice. Are we going to go the Asian way? And as I said, don't think this is just China. Look at track and trace in Korea, in Singapore, and in other countries that are much more allied to the West. It's a very different cultural phenomenon. Or are we going to stay with the Western approach, the American approach, the European approach, dare I say also the Indian approach, and say, no, we want to have our freedoms, we want to have our privacy, and we will give up some of the ability to organize ourselves that the Asians have. This is the choice that really stands in front of us. Next slide, please. Trade is going to differ. It probably will not be at the level it always has been. It overperformed output. There's a great figure that says that actually trade was twice the level. Trade grew at twice the level of global output from 1985 to 2010, and it can't continue. It will change, and as manufacturing improves in its efficiency within countries, it will lose some of the cross-border trade. If I just look at next slide, please. It will change direction. So if you're an agency in the Western Hemisphere, or if you like the Central Hemisphere or the Eastern Hemisphere, you're going to be doing a lot more trade within your own region, because distance is no longer the problem. It's much more convenient to be on the same time zone. And we're already starting to see this phenomenon beginning. So there will be changes. Next slide. Next slide. And there will be opportunities. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump to the end. There's another interesting section, but we don't have time for it today. So what I'd like you to do, please, is just go right to the end of the presentation and show the very last slide as I introduce our panel. And while we're jumping some of the others, then I'm just going to say two things from the last couple of slides before this one. We as communicators, we have a responsibility to create dialogue between people as countries, nations, and cultures start to shut themselves off from each other. But we also have an opportunity to leverage the differences between cultures and people, to establish understanding and to keep trade going. And there is nobody better placed to do that than independent agencies, because they live in the culture. They live in their own culture. They understand it. They leverage it. They create communications within it. And we are beginning to see a real rise of interest in independent agencies. If I want to know what I should really be doing to connect with people in Indonesia, I should have an agency that is Indonesians, run by Indonesians, for Indonesians in Indonesia. And if we can bring it together and we have all the communication tools to do that, we'll be in a great shape and we'll have a great opportunity. So that's my perspective on the global situation. And now, please, I'd like to ask you to metaphorically put your hands together and bring my fellow panelists into the panel, please. Can we change the Zoom to make sure that we see the panelists, please? Great, I think that's everybody. Rick, Stephen, yes, okay. So just welcome all of you. If you connect, make sure you're connected to audio, raise your hands if you have a problem. Marianne van Barneveld, Rick, are you raising your hands because you have a problem? I think we need to unmute you. Just unmute yourselves. If anybody else is
I'm okay, Julian. I'm fine.
You're good. That's great. Thank you. So please welcome from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Marianne van Barneveld. Marianne is the president of the PRWA, which is a network of independent agencies, which we at the Network One affiliate with. Stephen Milliken. If some of you signed up originally, Stephen's chairperson, Kiri Sinclair of Sinclair Communications, was going to join us. She has a hospital appointment important for her, brought forward to today. But Stephen, who is the COO, very kindly agreed to stand in. And I have to say, we're a fantastic stand in, as we learned on the practice call last week. I'd like to welcome Rick Like, who is the Executive Vice President and the Managing Director of the Public Relations Division of the big US independent MOA. And finally, Rebecca Wagstaff, and particularly glad to have Rebecca in as well. She's not the owner of the agency, which is Three Monkeys Zeno. Zeno is affiliated with Edelman, but it's the kind of the sparky, sharp, independent thinking part of it. And I'm not really allowed to say that, but it's kind of the way we see it.
Sounds good.
But Rebecca runs the new business effort, because we're going to talk both about what agencies have been doing and also about a little bit of a focus on how they have been learning to win new business. So I'm going to ask all of you really to start off one by one, and hopefully with Marianne perhaps first, about how would you define how you coped with the pandemic at the beginning, and how that has led you to changes within the way that you run your agency before we start thinking about clients, the way that you run your agency that you think will live with and continue. Marianne.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, well, the first thing we did at the beginning of the pandemic is starting to work from home. And in perspective to the team, what we did there is we first really made a lot of effort to make sure that everybody stayed connected in the team, because it was a strange situation for everyone. So after making sure that everybody had a good chair and a good screen and all the necessary equipment at home, the connection between the people in the team and the bonding was the most important thing that we focused on. So everyday Zoom meetings for starting the day was one of the first things we did.
Stephen, you came to this from a very different position, because you're in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong had been through something that was kind of similar. So what did you do when you saw the coronavirus on the horizon?
You know, it was interesting. And I will say this is where Kiri's expertise and years in Hong Kong, she is a lifelong Hong Konger. So she worked through the SARS epidemic as well, 30 years ago. So, you know, end of January, early February, when the news reports started coming out that a SARS-like flu was emerging and was starting to spread, as soon as the SARS hit the newspaper, everybody knew what to do. Everybody started wearing masks immediately. There was very little prompting required on the part of the government. Same, we have offices in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, and Singapore. So, throughout the region, we saw a pretty swift reaction. What was interesting, little regional differences. In Singapore, you were told not to wear a mask unless you tested positive. And that was a signifier that, for others, that they should steer clear. So there were little nuances when we were still able to have meetings at that initial onset that we had to kind of maneuver around with our staffs to make sure that they were remaining safe. But we did, because of the protests that also took place in Hong Kong last year, at the second half of last year. We were working from home for a good portion of that period as well. So we had to kind of go back and look at our technology infrastructure and build into it, make sure that everybody had the capability to work from home, to work remotely, wherever they may be. So when the pandemic hit, we had those systems in place, which was, a very lovely silver lining to have to all of this. But it made our transition to that work from home much easier than, I would say, agencies in other parts of the world have had to experience.
Rick, you've got the headlines at the moment with all the discussions going on in the US about how to handle the pandemic. How have you personally been affected by this, you personally in your agency? Business something like usual, or really does it feel completely different?
It's different in some ways, and it's the same in some ways. Because we have 9 offices and teams that are integrated across the offices, we had the technology in place to go remote, because on a daily basis we were interacting with people in our other offices quite regularly. This obviously accelerated that, but as far as business goes, I think it's the same for most agencies. We've had clients who've gone into almost complete shutdown mode. We have other clients that it's business as usual. So we've been feeling our way through that. We have some of our clients who initially pulled back quite a bit. They've got more than a toe back in the water. And from what we're hearing from some of them, they understand that 2021 is a year that they're going to have to come back maybe even a little bit more aggressively.
And finally, Rebecca, could you give us also a little angle on what you did towards keeping your staff healthy, happy, and well-being? Because I think you did actually quite a lot of different things, and maybe there's some of the things that still work, and perhaps other people could get some ideas from as well. How do you keep your people on side?
Yes. I think absolutely. I think there was, I think the role of internal communications became really important for us. Obviously, on the sort of information side, we did a bunch of things that really were important to informing our clients. So we had our global CEO. We're part of a network of several offices, but our global CEO committed to do a roundup email every night. So when we woke up in the morning, she was in New York, everyone had a sort of barometer on how she felt things were going. And that also meant us sort of feel we were really sort of all in the trenches together. There was always key insights there that we could forward on to our clients. And the other thing that we quickly did in terms of sort of information was we started to do a media analysis report for all of our clients. It was a massive heavy lift. A lot of it was using social and digital tools. Those teams were already really busy because those briefs pivoted into social and digital. But they did a report every day out to our clients, which informed, who was communicating what, the government, all the different stakeholders, and how clients should respond to that and what they needed to be mindful of. So once we'd got the sort of business information out the way, it was then important, as you were saying, to look after our people. In the business that we work in, our people is our asset. As an independent, we have a really strong culture. That's obviously much harder, as you'll all know, to replicate virtually. But right from the get-go, we did something quite serious. We did a Be Kind to Your Mind initiative where we gave all of our people in all of our offices a free subscription to Headspace. So we encourage them to go on to listen to podcasts, to information, to help them be mindful. Obviously, we know like Zoom calls all day long can be actually quite draining, even though you might not have a commute. And then we overlaid that sort of serious element with really fun things to try and replicate the culture that we are able to deliver in the office environment. And so, yeah, we had, you know, Spotify playlists where different people had to put together a playlist that were played at 3:30 every day. So you either had to listen to rock music if it was a rock fan, or classical music or whatever. We did Wednesday quizzes, which were far too hard for me to ever get involved in because they were seriously serious questions in there. And then we one fun thing that we did, Julian, was part of the culture crew. We asked everyone to draw a picture of each other from memory. So everyone drew somebody, and then we ultimately collated all those together and we printed them all on tea towels. Everyone was at home cooking banana bread, as you'll know. And so everyone now has a tea towel with, 65 faces on them of hilarious pictures that we drew of each other. And that really was a highlight, just making us all feel we're all in it together, and also a bit of levity in what was clearly a really difficult time.
Sounds like you kept your people on side.
Yeah.
What about clients? I mean, all of you had tough calls to make with clients because not every client could honor their commitments. Not every client could pay the bills. Not every client does pay the bills on time. How did you deal with the tough bits of this? I'm going to pick on somebody for this. Rick, I'm going to start with you on that one, just randomly.
Yeah, I mean, there have been conversations. We've had clients pull back. Fortunately, I think everybody's approaching this as kind of the brave new world and in needing to be collaborative in this process. We've had some clients. A lot of our business in one of our offices is travel and tourism. Well, when airlines aren't delivering passengers to the resorts, that the resorts can't really keep up with doing business with you. However, we're seeing those rebounds. So in actuality, we've had some former clients who were off doing their own thing come back to us in the midst of this because they've needed specialized either crisis communications or employee relations type things. So I think in a process like this, our flexibility really comes into play. And being really partners with clients and trying to find a way forward, even if it means, reduce budgets for a period of time.
Marianne, I mean, what's your feel on how you've managed clients going through difficult times?
Well, it is, of course, as Rick just said, it is very much depending on, the area, the business they're in how this pandemic is infecting them. And what we did, the first thing we did was to just call all our clients. So not only the ones that were immediately damaged by the pandemic, but all our clients, to offer our services not only on PR, but on all extra communication tasks that were coming up. Every company had to deal with new communication, extra communication, because everything was so uncertain. So we did a lot of reaching out, and especially by telephone, to our contacts at clients to make sure that they knew that we were available to help them. And this has really brought us in a situation that we got extra services that we could give to our clients, so extra business for us. But on the other hand, we also had clients that were really damaged by the pandemic, so that they had to stop their contracts immediately because there was so much uncertainty. And there we tried to be as flexible as possible, as Rick just saying, because we're all in this together. So it was a mix of some clients going up and asking us for extra services, and other clients stopping immediately. So that really made us, you know, the need for flexibility in the team grew enormously. But yeah, I think it was one of the things that really helped us through until now, is that we became more flexible.
I think one of the things, just to build onto that, Marianne, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it is really about listening to the people who are on the front line, having those conversations, who have the client relationships. Because I just feel like, you know, as a business, we're thinking, okay, well, what products and services can we talk to our clients about, crisis and issues, or a sustainability proposition that they might be interested in? But it's the clients, the people who've got the relationship with the client on the day-to-day, they need to be very clear on the appropriateness of us talking to them about how we can work together through this, because I think they would have a really, they're the ones that have the relationships, and it's knowing, are they receptive? Is it appropriate? Of course, we can be agile and flexible, but you really need, it's that really clients feeling that you're on their side, that you're helping them, rather than, you know, trying to build some fee where it doesn't exist, you know?
Yeah, true. So asking them what they were needing was really important.
Yeah, definitely.
Stephen.
I couldn't agree more. I think that, you know, through all of this, it really gave agencies an opportunity to demonstrate the level of partnership to the clients, right? So, you know, I know some agencies, you know, weren't able to be flexible with the contracts, or, you know, tried to dig their heels in at first. And then, you know, by the time that they saw the magnitude of what was happening, you know, some relationships have been damaged already. We were very prescriptive. We identified one person, it happened to be me this time, but to do all of the client negotiations on the contracts, and we were flexible with them, knowing that, you know, they would come back once this passed at some point. And I think, you know, there is the word in Chinese, crisis, is made up of two characters. One is danger and one is opportunity. And I think that's such a beautiful way of looking at it, right? Because it, you know, yes, you're facing this danger, but it does bring around new opportunities. And this really did, it opened up new opportunities, you know, as the others have said, to showcase some of our additional capabilities to clients that maybe they hadn't considered in the past. And, you know, in some instances, we've seen our scope expand to now include those additional services that they needed during the crisis. You know, we also did a lot of the brand analysis, the media monitoring and reporting on a daily basis, and they've asked to keep that going even though their business is returning, because they found the value in that. So I think that, you know, that through all of this, being able to show to the clients that that sense of true partnership has been the opportunity that we've seen.
Marianne, I was going to ask you too, because you mentioned the same thing about adding services or additional services. And I'd like to ask everybody is, if you have an example to share of an additional service which you've added since the start of the pandemic, don't have to name the client specifically, but it would be great to share. Marianne first, because you mentioned it, so I just wondered if you had an example in mind.
Well, I think the most important thing is what we did and we didn't do it for one, but for several clients, is to help them with the CEO communication in a team, just to give them tips, and also and also help them with the new communication structure in their organization, which is normally not our main service, because our main service is PR and really the communication outside. But now we also help them to do with the inside communication within their company.
Rick, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, that internal communications has ramped up. We have always had a strong employee communications program within our firm, and that's elevated itself. A lot of the CEO messaging. The other thing is on our clients' relationships with their customers and being able to deliver on their promises. Early on in the pandemic, we did a number of things for some of our industrial customers that reassured their customers about their supply chains, their ability to deliver on their contracts, and what they were doing, frankly, to maintain a safe workplace so that they didn't go down because of pandemic, that they were making sure that they were doing what was necessary in their workplaces. So some different kinds of communications. And that was also complicated in some cases because we had clients who were either on hiring freezes of their own or had some of their key people that they had to furlough during this within their communication staff. So their expectations and needs were dialed up with us a bit. They may have had somebody who might have handled this in the past who all of a sudden wasn't there, but they found that they really needed this type of communications.
Thank you. I just want to pause for 1 second because I want to ask the technical team, forgive me, I'm not sure. Can we take questions from the audience in this panel? Because if so, I will allow time for that. If not, I will keep asking questions. Yeah. Okay, that's great. They haven't come through to my chat yet, but if you could do that, I'll keep an eye on that. And I just want to really ask the panel, one major question, which I think is on everybody's minds. How are you approaching the opportunities and challenges of new business? And I think there's two aspects to this. And one is how you're getting clients to come in and talk to you, and how that's changed in today's situation. And secondly, we're going to look at how the pitch process or the proposal process is changing and what you've learned about pitching. But let's please start with the first one first. And Rebecca, as new business is your thing, I'm going to give you floor on that for a second. Yep. Yeah. How are you getting clients to come?
So I suppose one of the most disconcerting thing was sort of a couple of weeks into the pandemic, I just kept hearing everyone saying the way out of this is through new business. And I was like, okay, so no pressure on me. And yeah, so I think a couple of things, it's all about adapting. Okay. So right at the beginning, we all sort of stopped still for a couple of weeks and, saw all our project income drop off and, just did as best we could. But in terms of new business, I think as an agency, we have a good reputation. And I think that has really, really helped us through the pandemic, so that the long tail of reputation has meant that our phones are still being ringing. We're still having opportunity because our awareness is still out there, so we're always on the consideration list. However, you cannot take that for granted, and so we have still maintained our proactive marketing program. But what we have tried to do is adapt for the fact that we can't meet face to face. One thing that I quickly did was looked at the analysis of where source of leads. We know in our business in particular, personal contacts are super important for us. So I think well over a third of our new business opportunities come from personal contacts. And so we quickly have developed a program of virtual events. So we're doing, I was conscious of the fact that lots of people are joining lots of webinars and we had to do something different. So we have attached something that we know people enjoy, which is wine and cheese. And so we're doing virtual wine and cheese networking. So our warm contacts, not cold, but people that we know, we invite them along to, a small intimate session. We have a topic that we talk about. So it can be sustainability or purpose or crisis and issues or whatever. And that's all wrapped around something pretty informal that people are incentivized to join, because no one wants to be sort of, join a heavy work meeting at the end of the day. And so it's really about, what we will all know, which is just you can't stand still and wait for stuff to come to you. You have to adapt and work with what you've got, and then make sure that you're delivering exactly a quality product when you can, for clients to be able to want to join.
Stephen, wine and cheese, what's the equivalent in Hong Kong and China?
I think it's so genius. I'm going to borrow that one, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, it's got a great name. It's called the boardroom in the bar. It's like the best peer-to-peer discussion in the bar. Yeah.
I will say, it was interesting when we first started to see clients pausing. It was almost like, the universe was looking out for us, because one client would pause and then the phone would ring, and another piece of business would come in, somebody needing help to maneuver the crisis, or looking to go transition to a more digital platform. So we were very lucky in that sense, and it is all about reputation. And again, playing on the experience that we had in SARS, and because we were ahead of most of the rest of the world with the pandemic, we were able to put together some learnings very quickly and share those with prospective clients, as well as our agency friends. And so we spoke to hundreds, if not thousands, of people through webinars, sharing the insights, both on how to protect yourself and your company from what is about to come. And then we followed that up with a brand recovery plan based on best practices that we saw throughout Asia as the brands transitioned. So marketing, but marketing that served a purpose, that was useful to other people. This was something that we did. We put it out there to the universe for the benefit of everybody, knowing that karma will come back at some point, and it has, and people have remembered that and have come to us with business as a result of those efforts. So we have been fortunate in that way.
There's an interesting question just come in on this topic from Peter Finn, and he says, how have you changed how you are marketing your agency during the pandemic, and if yes, how? And I think, Stephen, you kind of answered that with marketing with purpose. I'd like to ask Rick and Marianne, what would be your answer to that same question, if indeed you have changed?
Yeah, we have changed it. One of the things we changed is that we really put a lot of extra efforts on social media, because what we saw during the start of the pandemic is that the social media use increased enormously in the Netherlands, because people were at home, were more on LinkedIn, more on Twitter. So we increased our marketing activities there very much. Another thing that we did was we initiated a PR consultation hour for all companies who had questions about PR in the pandemic, by Zoom, of course. So weekly consultation hours that people just could sign in for, giving you free advice for your PR during the pandemic. These are two things that really brought us a lot already.
Weekly hours for individuals to talk to you, or for all of your clients together?
For clients and for companies we do not know yet. So we boosted it on social media and promoted this consultation hour, just so also to get really new business in.
Cool. Rick, thoughts?
Yeah, Julian, I think a couple of things. We realized that our specialty areas, our expertise areas were places where we could really play a strong hand during this, and also geographically. But one of the things that we did coming out of the gate is we fielded several research studies that we were able to focus in those areas where we have expertise, and develop insights for clients to see how people were reacting to the pandemic, how it might affect those clients' businesses. And we shared that out. We didn't just, we shared it with clients, but then we also published that out, because there was interesting information within that marketers could use, and it could extend our people's awareness of our expertise within those categories. And within the specialty groups themselves, we were quite active in putting together knowledge pieces, thought leadership pieces that we could share out through our social channels, through our own channels, and then out through earned media with publications, trade publications in the categories, and then marketing publications. So we were doing a number of those things already, but we saw this as an opportunity to ramp up and show our preparedness, our readiness, and our ability to go roll our sleeves up and go to work for clients right away, using data that we had collected.
No, thank you. And now I'm going to ask the second part of the question, which is, and there's a couple of questions coming in the chat on the same theme. What have you learned about the actual pitch process, whether it's a competitive pitch or whether it's presenting to a prospective new client, that you wished you'd known earlier? And I'll give you an example, because I listened in on a similar panel last week among the advertising search consultants, and they said, one of them said the biggest thing was agencies just weren't prepared. They were fine with Zoom, but you know, if the client preferred to use a different technology, they hadn't rehearsed it, they hadn't prepared it. And that was a big mistake, because it made the thing got off to a bad start. It didn't look professional, it didn't look smooth. That was a piece of learning that they thought they'd had. What is one piece of learning each? What do you know now about pitching in the pandemic or presenting that you wished you'd known at the beginning?
Shall I kickstart on this? I think something that massively, we knew anyway, but actually has really brought it home, is the importance of timing. And so obviously as good independent agencies, we time all of our rehearsals, so we think that we're going to be okay. And then I think when you go into a pitch scenario, when it's face-to-face, that grace period of 5 to 10 minutes where you might have talked a little bit too much or expanded an idea, actually when it's a face-to-face meeting, it's sort of allowed, and it just, you know, it wraps up, the meeting wraps up well. What we've really noticed is that, you know, when we've only got an hour and a half, if we're not on time, the clients have to leave and we're then battling through, you know, the last sort of 20 minutes can become uncomfortable. And so it's that whole thing about pace of your pitch, to make sure that everyone knows what it is that they need to communicate, and you know, instead of letting it slightly meander along the way. Because it is so much harder to pitch on Zoom. It's really hard to build chemistry. And I think, just being able to know that you're leaving enough time, as you say, for the questions, so that everyone is properly landing the idea without the body language and nuance that you get when you can read the chemistry in a room, is really important.
Another thing that we saw was that the big pitch teams will not work on Zoom. Yeah. It's difficult to get a good chemistry if you are on Zoom with 5 people of the agency. Yeah. So you have to really decrease the number of people to get the right chemistry.
Yeah, definitely.
Being ready is critical for, you know, the platforms you're using. I counted up the other day. I've had meetings during the pandemic on 7 different platforms, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm better on some than others. But the other thing that comes into play, you know, being able to read the room, you could see before when somebody was looking at their cell phone and things. And one of the bigger distractions that I see is when people go off video, because that's telling you, you know, they're getting up to get a cup of coffee, or their kid is asking them for help with their homework, or something's going on. And I think over Zoom and other things, the attention spans of our clients and prospects that we're presenting to are shortened a great deal. And you have to realize that if you're droning on, it's not gonna help you in that. You have to make your point. You have to make it, you know, maybe 2 or 3 times during the presentation, and be done with it. You can't drone on.
Yeah. True.
Yeah. Steven, I think the attention span, you know, is it's been such a casualty of all of this, right? And yeah. We've pared everything back. You know, everything is concise. Everything is, you know, meant to deliver a point. If it doesn't deliver a point, if it doesn't serve a purpose, if it's not going to, you know, get across the goal line, don't put it in the presentation. We just need to keep it, you know, very concise, crisp, and engaging as, you know, as much as possible. You know, and the things we will We'll send an appendix with all of the superfluous information after the fact. But while we're in that room, we're not going to waste our time on our credentials. They've seen our credentials. We don't need to do that then. That's not the time to do it. We need to get to the point before they start to lose interest in us.
No, I think that's really, really cool. Thank you. And I'm conscious we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. There's one question that's come in from 2 or 3 people. It's taking us a little back to the beginning, but let me ask it to each of you. It's, how do you ensure the mental health and well-being of your teams while they are working virtually? And I'd like to add a supplementary to that. Do you think you'll stay working virtually when the pandemic is over? But the first question is the more important. It's how do you help people's mental health, your own teams, your own staff? Rek, go on. You get first shout. No, go on, Rek. You can't be first every time.
I think going back to what I was saying earlier, like our people are absolutely, they are our business. And I think, we had this Be Kind to Your Mind initiative, which did involve us having Headspace. But more than that, we positively said to people, don't work at lunchtime, switch your laptop off, go out and take the dog for a walk, go to the gym. We communicated every day about talking to your line manager if you're overwhelmed with work. I think when you're in a junior position at the beginning, people were just working, like work doesn't stop, you can carry on. And we just had to make sure that we were checking in on people, making sure that they knew, that this is a difficult time. You're not expected to, deliver absolutely everything all the time into the evening. And so that real thing about switching off and having, light moments, enjoying being at home, all that kind of stuff, we were just very, very, very conscious of. And I've been in situations where I've worked all day and I haven't done my lunch, and I know how draining it is. And so it was taking that human element to how much we value our colleagues. And I think the second part, are we going to continue working from home? I think it looks like yes. I think sort of in the summer we were thinking there would be a post-COVID world where we'd all go back to the office and it would all be pretty similar to how it was before. But I think we're not sort of, when second wave, third wave, fourth wave, it's it's still here to stay. And so I think in that, whilst we're in it, I think the office will be a hub for essential meetings where face-to-face, is better. But I think, the visibility I have is that we will continue to work like this. So we've got to make it work for our people and make it an enjoyable experience as well as a profitable experience.
Folks, I'm just conscious we're on to our last minute now, and they might pull the plug on this thing because they can't rip me off stage quite so easily. A quick 1, 2, 3, 4 on everybody. Rebecca, you gave us your opinion. Yeah. Do you think you will go back to working in the office most of the time, about half the time, or less than half the time after the pandemic is over? Marianne?
I think more than half the time. We had our period from June until 3 weeks ago that we were back in the office again, but we were back in the office for about 60% of the time, and it worked very well. So everybody came back to the office for 3 days a week, and dividing the team so it would not be too crowded. And what we really saw is that it really gave our creativity a boost again to have people together in the office. So I think for our work, it is very important to have, the small direct contacts, just a small question here, an opportunity to share for, a press opportunity to share, things like that. So yeah, I would love to go back to 60%.
Okay. Rek?
And our team also agrees with that.
Rek, 60%?
I think I would say collaboration is so important in our business that the coming back together more than half the time is a goal. But I think this has also taught us from a productivity standpoint and from using technology to work together. We're able to do this if we have to, or even if we want to. So, but we'll be back in the office because collaboration is so critical across our business.
Stephen, do you agree?
We're back in the office. We're all back in the office. We have been for almost 2 months now. and the numbers, have stayed low, and we hope that they continue to stay low. The team is thrilled to be back. The sense of collaboration and the team, they thrive on that, right?
So you're 100% back in the office?
We're 100% back in the office.
Okay.
And
so
it is.
maybe
we're a little bit flexible. If people aren't feeling well, we absolutely stay far
that's
away.
really nice of you.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. There is sentiment in China still. Team, thank you very much for all you've contributed. That is the end of our time. I'm sure everybody will be happy if you would be willing to take any questions on LinkedIn or other things going forward.
Of course.
So big thanks to everybody. Thanks to Paul for having us, and I'm handing now back to you, Paul, I believe.